Welcome to Mormon Land, a podcast all about the news and culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and other Mormon faiths. I'm a religion reporter, Sahar Qumsiyeh, and joining me is Senior Managing Editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage.
Hi, Tamara.
Before we start, a quick ask. If you have not done so already, we invite you to go immediately to patreon.com/MormonLand and click on Become a Member. For as little as $3 a month, you can access all of the Tribune's faith coverage, podcast transcripts, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/MormonLand. Now for today's episode. As the war in Israel and Gaza rages on with civilians caught in the violent crossfire, those watching from across the globe are asking what it must be like to live in such a conflict-ridden space. What does it mean to face possible violence every day? Sahar Qumsiyeh can offer a first-hand description of how routine activities were affected by such a fraught environment. Qumsiyeh is a Palestinian born in Jerusalem and raised Orthodox Christian outside of Bethlehem. She converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints while receiving a master's degree from Brigham Young University in statistics. She earned a doctorate from the Middle East Technical University in Turkey in the same subject and has taught at various universities in the West Bank and worked for 4 years as a data analyst with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Jerusalem. She currently teaches in the mathematics department at BYU, Idaho. She's also the author of Peace for a Palestinian, One Woman's Story of Faith Amidst War in the Holy Land. She joins us today via Zoom to talk about the current crisis, the tensions that led to it, and what Americans, and particularly Latter-day Saints, should know when discussing it. Her views are her own and do not represent those of her employer or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sahar, welcome.
Thank you.
First, I wonder if you could give us just a brief description of who the Palestinian people are and address some of the misconceptions, the common misconceptions that you hear.
Yeah, so Palestine was a country which had a lot of people, and there were some Jews living there, but the majority of the people living in Palestine were actually Arabs, and during after the First World War and mostly after the Second World War, when the Jews were being persecuted in Europe and they wanted a home, there was a kind of a decision made that they would create a home for these Jews that were fleeing persecution in Europe and other areas. And they decided that they were going to split the land of Palestine into two regions and create a Jewish state. And initially, actually, the Palestinians, my people that were there in Palestine at the time, were welcoming to the Jews because the Jews, they've had Jewish neighbors, they had Jewish friends. And so they didn't see a problem initially by welcoming these people that are kind of fleeing persecution. And sadly, the people that came, the Jews, didn't quite come in peace. They massacred entire villages and towns. I had a friend of my mom's that was in the village of Deir Yassin when in the 1948, where Israel came in and these Jews came in, and they basically massacred everyone in town. And my mom told me that these people would kind of go out into Palestinian towns and would say in loudspeakers, if you don't leave, we will do the same things we did to Deir Yassin to you. And some Palestinian Arabs just were afraid and left. My family stayed because my family lived in the Bethlehem area. And so they figured it's a Christian town, nobody's going to hurt us. And so they thought it was safe to stay. But what happened is that all these towns that were kind of cleared out a lot of the Palestinian towns that were cleared out. All these people became refugees. So half of my people right now are refugees. Some of them relocated to different areas in Palestine, and some of them completely left the country and were never allowed to come back. So that happened in kind of 1948, where it was almost half and half, where parts of the country were left for the Palestinian people and the other half was for the Jewish people that came in from other countries. And in 1967, the Israel, or the kind of the state of Israel that was created there, occupied the entire country. And so basically after 1967, there was no longer a Palestine. I mean, if you go to the map now, it doesn't say Palestine, it says Israel. But if you go to a map before 1948, you'll see the name Palestine. My mother's birth certificate actually was issued by the government of Palestine. And so the Palestinians have been pushed kind of and treated, they were not treated as equal citizens of the newly established Israeli Jewish state. So they have continued to persecute the Palestinians for 75 years of occupation. We, the Palestinians that live in Israel, don't have any rights. What that means is somebody could kill me on the street and they would not have to go to trial. I have no rights whatsoever living in Israel. Israel has a law that they could arrest any Palestinian for 6 months without any reason. They just kind of, that's the base. I had a brother-in-law that was arrested multiple times. They'd arrest him for 6 months and then release him and then arrest him again for no reason whatsoever, just because he was active and helping people and other things. But so we don't have rights. That's one. We don't have the right to travel. We're not allowed to fly out of our own country. We have to travel by land to Jordan in order to travel. Say, if I wanted to come to the States, I'd have to travel by land to Jordan. We don't have continuous access to water. If you're Jewish, you have running water 24/7. If you're Palestinian, you only have running water once every 2 weeks if you're lucky. Electricity sometimes is cut off. We have walls that surround our cities. We have 25-foot concrete walls that was funded mostly by the US, sadly, that surrounds our cities and restricts our movement. And every time I want to go from one city to the other, I'm waiting at checkpoints or taking really long back roads. And again, it's just the feeling, because at checkpoints, you're not treated right. It's persecution, and you feel like you're a second-class citizen. I mean, there are roads in Israel where only Israelis are allowed to drive. Palestinians are not allowed to drive on every road in the country, only Israelis in certain areas. So it's an apartheid system. And I mean, when the Palestinians fight back, sadly, the population of the world calls us terrorists because we are protesting against this injustice.
Sahar, let me ask you a question. What was the relationship between Muslims and Christians there when you were there? And did you have Jewish and Christian friends?
I personally have Jewish friends, or had, but it's right now with the wall, the Jews and the Palestinians don't interact very much, except in areas where there are Palestinians and Jews living. So there's little interaction. And I think that's the root cause of the problem is Palestinians are on one side and Israelis are on the other. And each of the sides thinks the other side is a monster, because there's no interaction. But as for Muslims, yes, I've lived with Muslims all my life. I have Muslim friends. There's no problem there. There's no distinction. We treat each other equally. We love each other. It's great. And back before the whole thing kind of started, before 1987, when the uprising started, I think we had a lot of Jews that came to our town and shopped, and we went to their towns, and there wasn't, I don't think this conflict is about the people, because I think both people want peace. The Muslims want peace, the Christians want peace, the Jews want peace, but the Israeli government to me, is the root cause, because if they would just treat Palestinians like they treat any other citizen in their country, I think we wouldn't have this mess right now.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your personal journey here. How did you end up at BYU?
So I received a scholarship through the BYU Jerusalem Center. So the BYU Jerusalem Center currently is built on Palestinian land, but of course, the Israelis don't acknowledge that that's Palestinian land. And so the church actually rented the land from Israel, and they're paying Israel for the land. But for the church to pay the Palestinian side for the use of their land, they actually sent Palestinians on scholarships to BYU in Provo. And I got one of those scholarships. They're very competitive. I think they only offer 4 a year. And yeah, that's how I came to Utah and learned about the church and accepted the gospel.
And what did lead to your decision to join the church, and how did your family react?
So I actually wasn't really interested in the church, but one day I listened to General Conference, and one of the church leaders, it was President Hinckley at the time, referred to my country as Palestine. And that actually made a difference to me because, again, like I said, my country used to exist and now it's Israel. And I don't have a nationality. So for this leader of this church to call my country by its original name meant something to me. And so after conference, when I heard that, I said, well, this can't be a bad church. And so I told my friend to tell me about her church, and she told me everything. And it made so much sense. In my mind, I learned the Bible. I knew the Bible, and I knew a lot of things, but having a pre-existence and knowing the reason why we suffer, why we have trials, because initially I thought, well, God must hate the Palestinians because everybody hates us and we're being persecuted and nobody cares. And I thought that God hated us. But when my friend Shay explained why we have trials and that we are here on earth to get tried and tested, it kind of made sense. And everything that she explained. And I started investigating the church and reading the Book of Mormon and just fell in love with the gospel.
So what's your view of the current hostilities?
So the problem with what's going on is that a lot of the people kind of look at it and they don't really know the root cause. And I think I explained the root cause at the beginning. Is my people have been persecuted for 75 years, okay? I'm not justifying what Hamas did. I'm not justifying killing civilians. That's not justifiable, and nothing they could say could justify that. But if you say it's not provoked, that's not true. Because especially Gaza. If you think of Gaza, Gaza is a city of 2 million people. It's about the size of Salt Lake City, which means that it's a very densely populated city of mostly refugees. Now, again, refugees, these are Palestinians that were actually driven out of their original home and placed there in Gaza. And Israel has not allowed any of these people to leave Gaza for 16 years. And very few people are allowed to leave if they need like medical treatment or something special. But for the most part, they're not allowed to leave their city. They are cooped up there. They have no electricity half of the day. They don't have water generally. They are poor. they've been bombed. They've had a lot of, this is not the only time Israel has bombed Gaza. This has happened in the past. So a lot of them have lost loved ones and are just frustrated and upset. And again, I'm not justifying, but also the solution to this is not bombing Gaza. The solution to this is not what Israel is doing by bombing civilians. I mean, they've killed 3,500 civilians. These are not Hamas militants. Israel likes to claim that it's defending itself against Hamas. Now, let me explain who Hamas is. And this is something a lot of people don't understand. Hamas is a political party. Hamas is supported by half of the Palestinian population. Now, yes, there are terrorists in Hamas. There are people that do terrorist acts, but you can't say I'm attacking Hamas. It's like you're saying I'm attacking Democrats and I just want to kill every Democrat. You can't do that. This is not like someone who supports the Democratic Party. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to kill them all just because they have a leader who's a terrorist or something like that. I mean, you can't, and even them bombing civilian areas in Gaza in the hope of killing a leader. Like, do you think Hamas leaders are just sitting there? You know, when they did this attack on Israel, they knew that Israel was going to bomb Gaza. Like, they're hiding. They are not in plain sight. And so that just innocent people are dying. This has to stop. This is insane.
This question is a big one, and I'm sure one you've spent your whole life thinking about. What can be done to stop the fighting, or at least the killing of civilians? What is your prayer?
Sadly, this is my hope. My hope is that the Israeli leadership would see Palestinians as people. Right now, apparently, and I quote, they see us as human animals that should die. And I think they have to start seeing us as humans, and they have to start allowing us to live. And I think a lot of people would say, well, it's Hamas's fault. Hamas needs to stop. But I think the root cause is the occupation. The occupation has to end. We need to remove all restrictions on Palestinians. We have to allow them human rights, the right to travel, the right to water, the right to clean water, the right to have a citizenship, which we don't, the right to fly their flag, and just give them the basic human rights that everybody enjoys. And they're not going to do anything to you. Like, Israel is really worried. Oh, what if we open the borders, the Palestinians are going to kill us and whatever. I mean, if you look at the history and you see when those bad acts or terrorist acts started, you will see a cause. You will see a cause is the closure, is those walls. I mean, imagine if you have a 25-foot concrete wall that surrounds your city and you're not allowed to leave. I mean, what are you going to do? If you put a normal person, a sane person in jail for 75 years and continue to poke them and torture them, what do you think that person is going to do when they're loose? Of course they're going to attack you. I mean, it's natural. I mean, we're human. We could take so much of abuse and humiliation and kind of restricting our basic human rights. I mean, you can't blame Palestinians for defending themselves. Now, I don't agree with the method of defense. You know, the method of defense should not be killing civilians, but I still support my people defending themselves against the injustices done to them by the Israeli occupation.
Isn't the ultimate answer a separate Palestinian state or the restoration of a Palestinian state?
Any Palestinian state that has borders, that has a good government, that has equal rights to all Palestinians. I mean, I'm okay with, and Hamas disagrees. Hamas wants the entire country of Palestine back, right? But the majority of the Palestinian people would be happy with just a state with borders. Now, the problem is the Israel kind of idea of creating a state is you're going to have a state with a city here, and then another city that's 100 miles away, and then another city that's 100 miles away. And all these cities are surrounded with walls. That's their idea of creating a state. And they say, well, why are you complaining? Like, why is this not okay? That's not okay. You can't have a state that is not connected, where you have to cross to a different country to go to the next town of your state. So we want a state back to the 1967 border. Just get out of the West Bank, get out of Gaza, and just give us those.
So let me zero in on another aspect that has more to do with Latter-day Saints, I guess. You know, Latter-day Saints have always seen themselves as having a special relationship or affinity for the Jewish people. I mean, there are missionary lessons that are or were directed specifically at Jewish, what they would call investigators, I guess, people investigating the faith. How has that kind of relationship and that sort of kinship affected their views of Palestinians and their hardships?
So I think, sadly, there are a lot of people in the church that misunderstand what the gathering of Israel means. So a friend of mine was teaching a lesson to the young women, and it was about the gathering. And she said, well, what does the gathering of Israel mean to you? And one of the young women, 14 years old, said, well, it means to kill all the Palestinians. So obviously there's a complete misunderstanding of what that means. Now, President Nelson and other prophets, if you go back and read it, the gathering of Israel is not necessarily about Jews, but I think the gathering of Israel is mainly about bringing the gospel to other people. It's mainly, preaching and teaching and helping people come unto the Savior. And then they make covenants with him and they become his covenant people. It's just that misunderstanding. When they say the gathering of Israel, some members of the church say, okay, we believe that the Jews have to take over the land. That's just, and Palestinians have no place. Well, Palestinians are children of Abraham as well. I mean, did we forget that? They're actually blood descendants of Abraham. And so we are too. When we join the church, we are part of a tribe by adoption.
The church is building its first temple in the Middle East right now in Dubai, yes. or trying to at least, and their plan is, obviously the church's imprint in the Middle East is minuscule, small. But could that have any impact or help change some views? It appears that temple will mainly serve expats who are over there right now. But what do you think? Do you see any hope there?
I actually have high hopes for the Middle East. And right now it looks pretty sad and pretty hard. But I know that the gospel will spread so fast there. A lot of them are looking for the truth. And a lot of them are looking for that personal peace that I found when I joined the church. And so I believe that once we can get missionaries there, that the gospel is going to grow. But I believe in a God that's in charge and that loves Jews and loves Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims and everyone equally. And I know that he knows how to somehow get them prepared to receive his gospel and accept his son as their Redeemer and Savior.
So Sahar, as we begin to wrap up, I have a question. Were you satisfied with the First Presidency's statement on the current violence? Yes, I support them fully. And I think it's very important that I made a post the other day about, there were a lot of people that saying, I stand with Israel, I support Israel. And I wanted to encourage people to stand with the Savior, because the Savior doesn't pick sides. We're all his children. He loves us equally. He loves Arabs. He loves Palestinians, Israelis, Jews, whatever. He just
doesn't care who you are necessarily or the color of your skin. And I think we all should just stand with the Savior and be like him in loving and having charity to others.
What resources would you suggest for listeners looking to better understand the history of the conflict? And what can our listeners do, if anything, to help those impacted by the war?
So resources, there's a lot of good books. I mean, I would suggest my book, Peace for a Palestinian, but that's just me being biased. My brother also wrote a book called Sharing the Land of Canaan, which is actually a good book. His theory is you can't really split the state. You have one state with kind of a joint government of some sort. Another good book is Blood Brothers by Elias Shakir. That's a good one and that kind of shows the initial 1948 Jews coming into Palestine. And sorry, what was the other part of the question?
And what can they do to help those impacted?
So what can we do? Well, right now, the essential thing that people need to do is to let assistance come into Gaza. Gaza has had no water, no electricity, and no fuel for days. It's now been over a week. And if you imagine hospitals with people on ventilators, or they need power, they need water, they need supplies, they need medicines. This is essential. People are going to die. This is not something that can wait. This is something that needs to be taken care of within the next 24 hours. I mean, that has to stop. Like the bombing has to stop. But I think essentially right now is assistance that goes to the people of Gaza. And I think I just hope that people look at other sources when they read the news, because the US media is very biased. It just tells the Israeli side. So I hope that we're smart enough to look at other sources when we get our information, and so that we know what's going on really, and that we just, again, don't distinguish. People are all children of God. And if you're praying, you need to be praying for Palestinians and for Israelis. So don't pick a side. That's not okay.
The name of the book again is Peace for a Palestinian, One Woman's Story of Faith Amidst War in the Holy Land. Sahar Qumsiyeh, thanks for joining us today. And thank you to David Noyce, our producer, Chris Samuels. And we remind our listeners that they can keep up with all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.